My kind of fall into the crypto space, I think, is a little bit atypical for most folks. I think most folks are brought in for the technology,
For me, it was being
or
broke.
I was like, all right, this tech is insane. What's possible? I can't even, begin to imagine what's possible.
Neurons that fire together or wire together is kind of the quote. I aspire to be an AI, constantly learning off of the data that's input into me. And then I was like, I'll go back to school eventually, and then I just never did. I got into crypto instead. So they accidentally they sent $1.4 billion to North Korea. I mean, honestly, hats off to them. That's like incredible. They're really like that was good. I think you got to give them a little bit of applause for that.
And this is independently. The protocols aren't paying for this, right?
Mm,
They're simulating real engagement with these protocols. So, like creating fake GitHub accounts, fake commits, fake pull requests,
yeah,
fake tweets. Literally, if you've seen the videos of these
it's all
farms,
fake.
and I don't want to call any specific chains out, but you'll have these farms where they have just racks and racks and racks of cell phone motherboards that are
Mm.
pre-programmed to just do certain actions and just constantly
Mhm.
click farming. Your iris data is uniquely identifying and it's public, right? Like my iris data, I'm walking around constantly with my iris data just on display.
Right. There's an old saying, I can't remember who said it again, but early internet pioneer said, on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. Um, and I think that, after now 2, 3, 4 decades of the internet we've had, while that kind of aspect of the internet has been really helpful for a lot of being able to express themselves in ways that maybe they wouldn't be able to in the meat space. We have come to a point to where now, how do we even know that I'm not an AI on your screen that was generated by Claude or whatever the next video AI thing that I can't remember their names of now. But yeah, it's really difficult to like actually prove that. I can tell you, trust me, bro. I'm a human. You can look in the back. My room is a little bit of a mess. But also maybe just me being an AI trying to appear human to you. But so I wanted to have this interview with my friend Shady El Damaty, CEO and co-founder of Holonym, because he's been working on some pretty interesting tech that I think kind of gets at some of these issues over the internet. But before maybe we talk about Holonym, or you can introduce it a little bit, I would love to also talk about our shared actual experience of studying neuroscience and then get into some of the holonym tech that's being built that's really cool. But yeah, Shadi, want to give a quick introduction and tell us, how did you get to the crypto space and holonym?
Yeah, I love telling the story. Thank you for the intro, by the way. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, my kind of fall into the crypto space, I think, is a little bit atypical for most folks. I think most folks are brought in for the technology, um,
For me, it was being
or
broke.
yeah, totally. I mean, that's definitely, if you did like some sort of like latent analysis of all the reasons, that's definitely like a main explainer of the variance there. But or for the, I think for the community, it also is like a good reason. But for me, it was kind of none of the three. I was trying to solve an existing problem. I was actually at Georgetown at the time, finishing up my PhD, working on an interinstitutional a consortium, data sharing consortium that was looking at how do we track the developing adolescent brain with magnetic resonance imaging and behavioral studies. And so there was this huge amount of data all across, it was like there was a site in Brazil and in University Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre. There was a data set in University of Melbourne in Australia. Uh, we had collaborators all across the East Coast in the United States, and it was hundreds of terabytes this data set, and we needed a huge data set, right? Because we were trying to predict cognitive age in developing adolescents. So if your brain and your behavior looks a certain way, can we predict where along the normative growth curve are you? Are you like more advanced than your peers, or are you developing a little bit slowly? And how does your environment play into it? So, huge challenge in getting all of this data in one place, even just on a cloud instance, so that we could pre-process it and train models, synthesize data together, train models. But it wasn't as easy as you'd think, because all of the different universities, because they were in different countries, had different rules and processes for approving like where the data can go, because it's really sensitive patient health records and patient data. So that was really tough. And I was stuck for quite a bit. COVID hit, and I just had to come up with a solution, or else, like, PhD TBD. I wasn't sure when I'd be able to finish. So I happened to come across, at the time, like, there was a ton of excitement and interest in Web3 space, and I think like search engine optimization was really being optimized, I guess. But I was able to come across IPFS as part of my research in how to figure this stuff out, and ended up organizing a hackathon where I met my co-founder Nanak, and we basically hacked together a solution that allowed the universities to share their data sets directly instead of going through a third-party server. Um, Now, it never ended up making it to like this really large scale production, but I was able to kind of just get what I needed to get done for my research. And then after that, I was like, all right, this tech is insane. What's possible? I can't even, begin to imagine what's possible. And I want to take some time to really absorb it all and see what other really cool infrastructure upgrades I can build for science, for doing science at scale and distributed research communities.
That's super interesting. Yeah, it's nice to hear a story of someone like trying to solve a problem and then getting to the crypto space and finding it as an actual space of possibility. I believe was it you that told me once that that you invented decentralized science, or like kind of coined it?
Yeah. So I looked into this actually. So I have this email. I could probably pull it up. I have this email that I sent to one of my PhD defense, one of the members on my PhD defense board. And I remember she asked me, she's like, okay, well, what's next for you? Are you, gonna head off to University of North Carolina to do your postdoc? I've heard you might continue down the same field. And I said, hey, well, actually, I'm not quite sure. I'm really excited by this idea of decentralized science, DeSci, and really building out infrastructure to do research in the cloud, where I could set up my lab in some piece of software and be able to capture funding and do research kind of, in parallel but independently from the traditional academia, world of academia. And I just never got a response back from that. They're like, okay, whatever that means.
Right.
Like we'll write that one off 7 years later. Um, but yeah, so later I looked into this actually, because I had this idea, and actually for the hackathon I named, it's in the Global Brain Hack, I guess you could say like records on GitHub. Global Brain Hack it's like ETH Global but for neuroscience, although it knows nothing
Oh,
about ETH
wow.
Global. It's
There are
just
neuroscience
this
hackathons? I
yeah,
didn't
Brain
know that.
Hack.
Wow.
And it's styled after some other really global hackathon. I think there is this kind of tradition or culture about hackathons, especially on the internet, that all go back to this one type. But yeah, I know that the brain hack was modeled after this, and so yeah, we were thinking like, okay, well, how do we take these hackers from all around the world and give them infrastructure to share neuroscience data? So decentralized science seemed to be the right way to talk about it. Um, but funny enough, decentralized science or DeSci also sounds like DeFi. And I did spend some time looking on Twitter, coming up with fancy filters to see when it was first mentioned. And there's just like this random guy from 2019 with like a bootleg punk PFP, RIP guy.
Right.
And he's like, when are people going to build DeSci? All of his other tweets, I think, were like about compound and Ave and the future of France. I mean, finance. Um,
So you were before this guy, random guy on Twitter. So I knight you as the inventor or coiner of the term.
Thank you, sir.
But I also noticed I want to touch upon a little bit just because I thought it was cool. I noted that your handle on Twitter is Hebbian loops. So like Hebbian theory is like this very nerdy neuroscience thing of this guy. I can't remember his first name, Hebbs, I think, where he's basically the whole theory neurons that fire together or wire together is kind of the quote. So the more that like a neuron fires in the beginning of a path, then it will strengthen the end of that neurological path. Yeah, did I get that right? And what I'm curious why you like that theory so much.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I think it's like David or Donald Hebb, I think is his name. And he was this guy who's doing single unit recordings in neurons and was researching auto-associative learning. So like how do two pieces or blobs of biology, how two little cells can actually perform coincidence detection. That's kind of amazing that you have wetware, like just fats and salts and proteins that can detect coincidences in the real world. And if you assemble them hierarchically, somehow you get, you know, visual perception, auditory perception, cognition, emotion, and all the amazing things that brains do. So he was researching this at the very low level, just like how do groups of neurons decide to wire together to fire whenever, say, they care about the same thing, like a certain color or a certain type of sound. So Hebbian loop is just something I was like trying to come up with like some sort of a. I was trying to invent a Twitter profile for my future academic career, and this was before Musk bought Twitter. And I was like, oh, this has to have like some lore behind it. You know, I got to show I'm creative or something. So I took some time to brainstorm, and so Hebbian loop basically it's just the idea of auto-associative learning, but in a loop
Uh-huh.
where you're training yourself over time to learn new things. That's how I think of it. So it's like like if you're going to ask me to define it, I would say it's an autodidactic percept. So it's like something
Right.
that you can perceive that teaches itself over time to continue perceiving new things, perhaps.
So to be an AI let loose.
Yeah, yeah,
I aspire to be an AI constantly learning off of the data that's input into me.
yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't thinking of AI at the time, but it is interesting though, because there is something like abstract about learning in these like neural systems. There's like the wet stuff, and then
Hmm.
there's the cognition that happens. And I don't know, in neuroscience, you kind of typically treat them separately. Maybe we shouldn't, but we kind of
Right.
model them cleanly and try to ignore all the messy wet stuff.
Right. 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 So yeah, so I think that's to me that's really fascinating just because I did neuroscience as a bachelor's degree and then didn't make it past that just because yeah, I just took on too much debt, needed to work, was going to apply for a PhD. I didn't know what neurological pathway I wanted to follow. And then I was like, I'll go back to school eventually, and then I just never did. I got into crypto instead. But yeah, so maybe if you want to give us the download on what is Holonym, you guys are working on like several different really interesting projects, all kind of like in a similar space domain around identity over the internet. Um, but yeah, would you give us the what is Holonym and what are some of the things you guys are working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off with describing kind of where Holonym came from, and I'll briefly describe what it is. We started off actually working on private identity proofs for decentralized science organizations that were on chain. So if you wanted to use, say, like the D-Web to store or retrieve data, how do you deal with, say, private attestations on that data, right? Like how do you know that the data actually came from a certain person, from a certain lab, has, say, the actual data contains within it? And if you're going to use a public blockchain for this, you don't necessarily be wanting, want to put like even like encoded data on the chain. So there's all sorts of stuff, floating around for the past couple of years around this. Was doing a lot of research on like things like proxy re-encryption and some of the early work that Consensus did with the city of Zug, putting them on chain with a DID schema that never really took off, but was really interesting. Looking at things like Shamir secret sharing for building data vaults. So, but really where I think the tires hit the road was when I convinced my co-founder Nanak to quit his job at Georgetown. He was also in computational neuroscience lab, kindred spirits, us all. And he really took a liking to like immediate, I think, affinity to the zero knowledge proofs, kind of just all of that.
Yeah.
And he really found a direction where we could start building out actual feasible zero knowledge proofs with like for consumers in Web3 for like normal dApps, actually bringing it to production. And it wasn't a coincidence either. Like at that time, a lot of the developer tooling around CK proofs was beginning to mature. You just had to have enough of a math background to be able to understand its significance or its limitations to properly engineer actual solutions that worked. So we did it. We built something. Won a couple hackathons at ETH Denver. Actually, was the first one that we built, the first version of it. And yeah, we won a couple awards. People found out about us, and then we got like a contract from Lobby 3, which was a political civic advocacy group started by Andrew Yang to raise funds for UBI and anti-poverty. But they were using crypto for this and needed to verify that their donors were actually US residents before they could put the funds to use for campaigns or for lobbying. So that's when we realized, hey, like, there's actually some really interesting real world use cases here in civic infrastructure, or taking, say, the tools or the policies or the needs that we have in bringing people together to do things for society. Crypto can actually help us do these things in a much more resilient, distributed, and maybe efficient way. So that's really where we got started, really dove deep into zkID proofs. So Holonym today, it's basically a software labs foundation that builds out technology for keys, wallets, and identity. And we support the establishment of this open framework that we call human.tech, which is a technology framework for embedding digital rights into distributed web technology. So things like self-custody, privacy, security, personhood, for example. But yeah, it's interesting because we started off really in this, trying to build decentralized science infrastructure towards realizing what we were building is a lot more lower level and touches many aspects. And the most kind of significant it felt really was civics, like how societies and countries are organized or can build resilient technology pillars to really, I think, like protect and elevate the kind of principles or values of that society.
Yeah, so it's interesting to to hear that from that perspective, or like that there is a clear need even in the sciences for this type of stuff. But so I understand you have Holonym, the Holonym Foundation, and underneath those are a few different things, like human.tech being the framework, and then there's the human wallet, the human network, and human passport, and maybe another one. Maybe I'm forgetting another one. But those are some of the products that I've seen. But yeah, would you like to talk about some of those? I know that human passport people might know as was the Gitcoin passport that was acquired by you guys, and now you guys have probably augmented it in various ways. I used it recently in the last Gitcoin round, and it worked pretty well. It was a lot faster than it used to be. But yeah, I want to talk about some of those specifics.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can give you guys the big overview. So Holonym is a software shop, and we're trying to create something bigger than it, which is this open framework for really putting humans at the center of technology. And so what we've done is kind of similar to, like, say, what Consensus or Ethereum Foundation has done, which is we're going to build out this base layer infrastructure We're going to give it everything it needs to get going with engineering support, community support, funding support, and bootstrap this base layer for basically embodying digital rights into technology or embedding them into technology. So what does that mean? There's multiple components within the human.tech infrastructure. At the very lowest level, we have, which really roots everything, is something called the human network. Human network is a bit of a big deal. I don't think many people really realize just how important it is to have verifiable randomness for key derivation and zero knowledge identity proofs. That's something that a lot of identity protocols that have tried to solve this problem of fragmented identity with privacy are kind of like falling into the same pitfalls. But with human
So
network,
maybe I think it would be interesting to kind of double click on that maybe because I think that yeah, the it's something that sounds real nerdy and real techy, like a very serious problem as far as like um, having provable identity in a way that is resilient, I guess, is how I'm thinking about it now. Um, but yeah, how would you explain this? I read a little bit of your documentation kind of about like this issue of entropy. Um, but yeah, we can like break that down a little bit.
yeah, no, nice. It's an entropy network. So when we talk about really, when we talk about embedding digital rights into technology, what we're really thinking of is, hey, can we give everybody self-custody for keys so that they can have encryption that nobody can break without their, and so that people can't reveal data can't show data without consenting to it. Can we give people the ability to create identities that are theirs that nobody else can grant or take away? Can we give them personhood, digital personhood in the digital world? So to do that, you need entropy. So the network operates in a decentralized manner. It uses Ethereum proof of stake with eigenlayer and symbiotic to secure and offer incentives for nodes to actually run the functions of the network. Each node computes what's called an oblivious pseudo-random function on a piece of data. And what that means basically is they're receiving some blinded piece, shard of data, and then they compute, basically, they transform that piece of data into something that's information theoretically secure, meaning that whatever comes in, what comes out, the probability of any character in that string appearing is the same as any other character appearing in any string. There's no information whatsoever. It's max entropy, which makes it very hard to brute force, right? Like if you try to guess the characters one by one by one by one, guessing one character tells you nothing about the rest. So this is really useful for key derivation. For example, if I wanted to create a key from some biometrics like my heart rate variability or my combination of like say my face and my voice or my face and like a web account, all of these pieces of data are low entropy, meaning that somebody, if they know just a little bit about me or have some other information about me, can probably brute force this and figure out what transactions I've submitted, what I've signed, or even crack like my private key. So with an entropy network, you can take this low entropy data that represent human attributes and actually derive secure private keys. And that's what we call human keys. That's something you'll see in our documentation where we're like, hey, private keys are great, but they're great for developers. What we need are keys that are more user-friendly and more human-friendly. And by driving them from human attributes, you solve a lot of the crypto UX problems like recoverability, ease of onboarding, and just like ease of use in general with the keys.
Right. So it's kind of this idea that maybe like just having like a voice can be trained on an AI and it can like reproduce a voice, like a face. You can just probably now at this point make an AI that makes it look like your face enough or like to bypass certain types of detection that aren't strong enough. It kind of reminds me of like, in those spy movies where they like there's like a thumbprint on like a piece of on like a wine glass or something, and they like take a piece of tape and they put it over the fingertip, and then they put it on the fingerprint scanner, and it gets them through the door or something like that, as being like a not strong enough form of security ends up being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are other things as well. I mean, that vulnerability is, randomness on its own doesn't protect you from that. There's other bits that we put in to prevent spoofing. But for example, with voices, I think they have like 20 or 30 bits of entropy, which isn't enough for a private key. For a private key, you need at least 128 bits of entropy.
How do
That's
you
why
measure
Worldcoin went with.
entropy? That's interesting.
Oh, it's a very simple equation actually. So
Okay.
if you want to calculate entropy of anything, literally you can even calculate the entropy of like your own podcast if you can transcribe it.
Uh-huh.
So what you do is, and the entropy will give you the bits of information in that corpus, that data that you're using. So what you
Uh-huh.
do is you break up whatever it is that you're wanting to measure the entropy of at the level that makes sense, like say at the syllable level or the word level or whatever, sentence level. Or in the case of like say like a voice, if you're trying to calculate the entropy of a voice recording, you'd maybe bin the frequencies, so within certain
Mm-hmm.
frequencies. And then you would threshold it. So say like you only take, amplitudes over a certain amount. And then for each unique frequency, you count how many times it appears in the entire recording, in the entire corpus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then for each, so you create a big table, and then you do this equation called the Shannon information entropy equation, and you calculate the probability times the logarithm of the probability, and you sum that for each of the bits. So for frequency one, you take the probability of frequency one, and you times it by the logarithm of the probability of frequency one, and you keep that, and then you add that to the probability of frequency 2 times the logarithm of the probability of frequency 2, and you do that
Oh,
until
wow.
you've computed that, the summation across all of the features in that corpus. And then what you end up with, which is funny, like it's hilarious, like I don't even know how this guy came up with it, you end up with the bits of entropy or the number of yes no questions you would need to ask to basically like decrypt or reconstruct any piece of data.
Hmm.
So it gives you the amount of information overall or the amount of surprise within that data set.
Okay, okay. Okay, interesting. Um, so yeah, sorry, you were going to say something else, but I was just like, how do you measure that?
Yeah, entropy is amazing. I spent a lot of time thinking about that in PhD studies. I wanted to do something with like language acquisition. But back to crypto. I think so we have the human network. It lets you derive keys from low entropy data, and it also does some other things too. So it lets you create what's called a secure nullifier. For example, if you wanted to generate an identity proof in zero knowledge, and you wanted to make sure that that identity proof wasn't used more than once and was very difficult to reconstruct the original data that was used for the identity proof, you would need to use some sort of like secure randomness for creating this.
Mhm.
And like a huge problem right now too in the space is you have, I don't know, like a dozen or maybe more identity protocols that are popping up, zero knowledge identity protocols that are popping up. And all of them might offer the same type of proof. They might say, you might have a world's proof of humanity, you might have a CK Pass proof of humanity, an Orange Protocol proof of humanity, a Reclaim proof of humanity. And so if you wanted to multiply yourself, right, you would go to each of these different protocols, generate the same proof, and then any project that accepts them, those proofs, you would just present that to cash in each time or do whatever it is that you needed to do. And that's because they don't use like a verifiable nullifier. And that's something Human Network can do because it is a network, it's decentralized, there's minimal trust assumptions. It's not something that we're running, it's Ethereum node operators are running it. We're just providing
Mhm.
software for it, maintenance for it. And yeah, and so this way you can create this kind of nullifier that's universal and lets you spend your identity truly only once, for example, if that's the use case that's needed.
Hey there, listeners. Before we jump back into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about how you can support the blockchain socialists and help us continue our mission of providing a voice for alternative and radical viewpoints on crypto. As a creator, there are typically three main ways to generate revenue: advertising, affiliate sponsors, and audience funding. For us, the first two options don't align with our values or the radical nature of our content. That's why we rely on audience funding to pay for the costs associated with producing the show. By becoming a patron on Patreon, you're not just providing financial support, you're actively participating in the growth of a community dedicated to creating high-quality content on the crypto and blockchain space from a political point of view. Your contributions to Patreon enable us to create more in-depth content, bring on amazing guests, and explore issues that matter to you without the constraints of traditional sponsorship. When you join us on Patreon, you'll receive access to exclusive content, blockchain socialist swag, and a copy of my critically acclaimed book, Blockchain Radicals, in digital format. More importantly, you'll play a vital role in sustaining our community of like-minded people who share your passion for meaningful change in the blockchain space. If you're looking for a more decentralized option, consider joining TBS DAO, which is a crypto alternative to Patreon by paying in bread, a post-capitalist cryptocurrency, which you can find more information on my website. However you support, your contributions make a real impact. Together, we can amplify the voices pushing the boundaries of what's possible and help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Yeah, so for people who are listening, they may not know much about restaking or what eigenlayer is or AVS is, things like that. So definitely, I recommend. It's hard to explain in like in a little clip, but this the explain like I'm five, but still difficult way that I understand it as a borrowing crypto economic security from Ethereum. So allowing people who validate Ethereum as stakers, specifically running the hardware, to also not just validate them, but to validate other types of decentralized services. So in this case, it's the decentralized service of adding verifiable randomness to these bits of low entropy data.
Exactly.
That's
That's perfect. I wouldn't.
nice.
You described it better than I could.
But yeah,
Really
definitely. If that's still complicated to you, it's okay. It's all kind of complicated. But I have had like at least one episode with someone who's building an AVS, Jake Hartnell. If you guys want to check out that episode to try to understand that a little bit more from a technical point of view. But yeah, maybe I don't know if you want to touch upon some of the other stuff you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the very low level, we have the human network, which kind of powers everything that we're doing because we need to have verifiable randomness for anything to do with keys, wallets, or identity. So on top of that, we built something called the human wallets. It's something that we're really excited about. It's been in development for about a year. It's a very complex piece of software, over I think like 110, 120,000 lines of code at this point, written by primarily a small team of cracked engineers. And incredible engineers, yeah. So the cool thing about Human Wallet is it uses this really friendly entropy power, superpower of the human network to easily create keys for users. So they can basically any dev can create this iframe or embed basically this like login portal that allows the user to present any familiar source of authentication to then log in and have an account. So I can come up to say like a crypto, like a political donation page, for example, say Andrew Yang's, donation page or whoever, and I can just basically sign in with OAuth and authenticate with biometrics, and I'm able to derive a key that I can then, on ramp into crypto with, or sign transaction with, or do voting with, for example. So Human Wallet is special in its way because it also has something called, it's the first of its kind actually, of a 2PC MPC wallet, or a two-party compute, multi-party compute wallet. So for the nerdy ones in the audience, you might appreciate this, but what we do basically is take that key that we create and split it into two. And we found that this is one of the best ways to secure any self-custody crypto wallet, where one of the keys is basically tied to your human attributes in a privacy-preserving way. And then the second half of the key is kept behind some policies or conditions. So, for example, if you're transferring, say, over $100,000 out of the wallet, or say like $10,000 out of the wallet, even though you might have authenticated and presented yourself with the first, to generate the first part of the key, if you hit some sort of predefined condition, the second part of the key won't be reconstructed unless you do some sort of action. Like, for example, I don't know, like click a link in your email or send a text message, SMS, or whatever could be set, like signed with a hardware wallet, for example. So this we find is going to be really powerful when you need to actually interact with complex pieces of software, especially in DeFi, as AI starts to really take root and intense, kind of like more programmable transactions that are bridging across chains. And there's all sorts of stuff that's happening on the back end. And what's happening in our move to make Web3 more, I think, easy for the average person to use is a lot of security has been abstracted away. But this one approach can help us basically take a lot of the best security practices, put them into, say, a backend AI or policy engine that requires, you can rank the level of risk for each of the different transactions and use that to kind of condition or program how the key is assembled and in which cases can you actually submit a transaction. And all of that can be user defined, right? So if you're, somebody with just like $1 in the wallet, like maybe you don't care about these things, but if you're, somebody who's running the entire family inheritance, all of World Liberty Fi or something in your MetaMask hot wallet, you might wanna look at some safe custody. So we built this for the folks that really are tired of getting burned, tired of getting hacked, of clicking on like phishing links. We've built it to be incredibly resilient to a lot of these attacks.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So like you can put a condition that like if for whatever reason you're making a transaction of moving all of your assets, probably you want to double check that that's not like a hacker that's moving all of your assets at once or something like that. So having that extra layer of security kind of embedded into that in a way that's, I presume, like more decentralized than like a custodial wallet.
Yeah, exactly. It's in the end, it's still a self-custody wallet because the key is always reconstructed on the client side. The key is never reconstructed anywhere else, and only the user has the ability to do so. But you can basically remove some of the authentication privileges from the client side device and put it in a server so that you can always have, say, like formal verification on the transaction that you're trying to execute. So the Bybit example is a great example. What was it, like a $1.4 billion heist by North Korea?
Yeah, that's crazy. So much money was stolen. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was literally like, two or three guys who had a multi-sig. It was a safe multi-sig, which is the
Yeah.
industry standard right now. And they have the hardware wallet. So they did everything right that Vitalik told us to do, right? That security experts tell us to do. We have the hardware wallet, we have the safe multi-sig, we check the transaction, we do the test transactions. So the attack was very sophisticated, but in the end, you didn't have these policies in place that prevent kind of like the suspicious activity because the code that they ran to execute the safe multi-sig transaction with the hardware wallet wasn't verified anywhere. So on their ledger, they open their ledger and they see some hexadecimal code and they're like, yeah, okay, I mean, looks right to me. Not really. I mean, you can't really
Right.
tell. It's hexadecimal code. You
Right.
hit
Right.
approve and there goes $1.4 billion, right? So that's called blind signing. So what would have helped with this is if you did have, say, another server that handled the authentication in a way that it could be formally verified. So you can read the bytecode, decode it, run it through some transaction simulation, and then deliver a human readable output to the user for additional authentication. Say, hey, look, warning, you're about to send funds to an address you've never interacted with before.
For people who maybe didn't see that a while back, Bybit is a big crypto exchange that was moving where they were for whatever reason had this people who own the multi-signature wallet that holds a bunch of the funds were given a transaction request, but the transaction request I think itself was like on the front end shown differently than what it was actually doing. And so they thought they were doing something completely different because the front end was, I believe, what was kind of the major part of the hack. Somebody got access to someone who had certain admin privileges to the front end of Safe, and that's how they're able to trick the signers into signing something that they didn't mean to sign, because all they're shown is this hexadecimal piece of random numbers and letters on their ledger that's supposed to, contain more information inside of it about what your transaction is. So they accidentally they sent $1.4 billion to North Korea. I mean, honestly, hats off to them. That's like incredible. They're really like that was good. I think you got to give them a little bit of applause for that.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's forcing the space to, if we're going to be decentralized, we're going to have to be able to handle adversarial attacks like this, because
Yeah.
what's the point of doing this if we can't build resilience and security into this?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the largest robberies in the world, and it was like thefts in a world, 1 billion. Like that's, I think like that, like I don't think
It's
like the
crazy.
the next lowest one comes like anywhere close, or
No
maybe, I
way.
mean, they're hundreds of millions, but yeah, still not that close.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, like if you're not counting, say, like white collar crime, but um, even then, I don't know. They're gonna make a movie of this someday. I bet you.
It's gonna be like the nerdiest movie potentially of how they got past everything. Um, yeah, and then the last thing I just wanted to touch on was human passports, just because that was another product that you guys have that's fairly popular. I'm curious if you can share a bit how it works and how you guys are seeing. 'Cause I think what's like seeing how different projects approach identity and how they kind of conceptualize it through software, because like a hard thing to like, identity is a very difficult thing to like instantiate in code, because it's like something that's we don't like necessarily formalize our identity as much as like a computer needs to use it, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'd be curious how you guys approach that.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's interesting. Yeah, we don't really think about identity as much as computers do when they're interacting with us, or we're interacting with them. Yeah, human passports it's our biggest product. About 2.2 million users last I checked. I think it's pretty much the largest identity protocol in Web3 by number of credentials. We've issued over, since starting, 35 million credentials through Passport. Um, it's primarily used for proof of personhood, so people that want to prove that they're a unique, breathing, living human being, specifically for governance or airdrop distributions. So, Uniswap is a protocol that really set kind of the standard for what it means to bootstrap a community by distributing ownership of your decentralized protocol. So back then they gave 400 uni to each Ethereum address that you interacted with the protocol or ever swapped. And then they gave a little bit of extra to, maybe a lot of bit of extra actually, to other projects that were providing liquidity. So nobody saw this coming. So there was no way really to like anticipate or plan for this and create lots of accounts or anything to maximize your airdrop. I think some people made like life-changing money on this just because they happened to have a lot of burner accounts that they swapped like $1 with or something once or twice,
Yeah,
10
yeah.
times. And but now there's an entire industry around airdrop farming, a multi-billion dollar industry at this point, where basically there's organizations in Southeast Asia, Africa, North America, so all over the world really, that we've come across, where their solitary goal is to interact with crypto protocols and simulate authentic human engagement. And this is independently, the protocols aren't paying for this, right?
Mhm.
They're simulating real engagement with these protocols. So like creating fake GitHub accounts, fake commits, fake pull requests,
Yeah,
fake tweets. You know, literally, if you've seen the videos of these
it's all
farms,
fake.
it's all fake, yeah. And I don't want to call any specific chains out, but you'll have these farms where they have just racks and racks and racks of cell phone motherboards that are
Mhm.
pre-programmed to just do certain actions and just
Mhm.
constantly click farming. So it's a real thing. And projects, when they do an airdrop, they're thinking of it as a customer acquisition cost typically. Like we want people to care about our token. So one way we'll do that, or our product or community. So what we'll do, one way we'll do that is by giving the token out to a group of people and trying to channel those Uniswap, good vibes from back in the day, and use that as a way of like on ramping people into the technology. Now, the problem is that a lot of airdrops that have been done since then have basically just given their money to a very, small number of well-organized folks that are farming these things. So Human Passport really emerged to help projects do fair distribution so that they could grow authentic communities and really signal, hey, like there's real people using the technology. Um, and one thing I'll mention too is, that's our primary use case today. We've done like over $430 million of airdrops have used Passport to
Well,
distribute, which is something we're really proud of. But it really also had humble beginnings. So we started off actually within the Gitcoin ecosystem, doing helping quadratic funding matching to make sure that the same sort of thing, people that are farming the Gitcoin grants ecosystem to drain the matching fund, because it's the same thing where
mhm,
if you can simulate people that are voting for projects, you can have a bunch of fake projects, have your own bots voting for your projects, and then you get all of the matching funds. So whether it's
mhm, mhm,
grants or airdrops, and one that we're seeing now as well is staking. So
mhm,
projects, for example, like the restaking platforms like Lido and like Rocket Pool, etc. They, they want to be able to really show that it's so decentralization matters for Web3, right? We don't want all of our nodes in one country or one organization because that's why we built this in the first place, that if an exchange goes belly up or if one person goes belly up, that the rest of the ecosystem can continue on. It's not but a scratch,
mhm.
right? So
Right.
it's really important to make sure that if, people that are staking Ethereum actually are many, many individual different people, not just say one organization. So that's something we've seen as well, kind of coming up in recently as proof of humanity has never been more important, to really show like who people are and to be able to actually have trust in who you're interacting with and some of the guarantees, for example, behind like say a network, if it's really just one big organization or a bunch of real people.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think what I was originally going to ask is like, what are the kind of like problems you guys are trying to solve? But I feel like, you ended up answering that question basically by explaining, what your products are kind of doing or meant to be doing around identity. It's the everyone is a dog or everyone is a bot problem that like when you and it this is especially the case in the crypto world where you have now value attached to digital objects that can be freely thrown around willy-nilly as you want based on how people want. However, there is a lot of value in like there's obvious value in like not allowing people who can bot or farm for this value, but it's just that capitalism kind of incentivizes that type of behavior, and so identity becomes this like important primitive that is like a difficult, non easy problem. But another, infamous or different infamous organization that is also in this kind of problem space is friend of the podcast Sam Altman's Worldcoin, in which the way that they kind of approach this problem, as probably many people know, is that you have to scan your eyeballs in order to prove that you're a human in a eye scanning orb thing that's been reported on plenty. A lot of people are very, of course, like skeptical of the claims that they're making around the privacy of that data. For me, I don't know enough really to say confidently or definitively that they've provided enough information about their practices or not, or been able to prove their practices or not, but I'm extremely doubtful nonetheless. So yeah, so I figured you could be a good person to kind of uh, piece out at least the differences between what WorldCoin is doing and their approach to identity, you guys.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Just bringing it back to the earlier point, one thing that really matters more than ever today is, we're becoming more and more reliant on these digital systems, and we need to find ways to take the rights that we assume to be self-evident in society because there's law and police to back them up, and just embed them by default into technology. And the more resilient we make these rights, the more carefully we apply these rights, I think the better off society will be. One of the most important rights you can have in any society is personhood, right? Saying that, hey, you are a person, you can demonstrate you're a person, you have these rights, privileges, and affordances that come with that, right? Depending on whatever community or social contract you've entered. But doing personhood in this way is really, really difficult, right? Especially, it's hard enough in the real world. I mean, you've probably, audience, and you guys have all heard about like, social security fraud or, who's really a citizen and who's not a citizen and etc. Um, and yeah, there's all sorts of crazy stories too about like people pretending to be somebody else or what have you.
Mm.
But doing personhood on chain, completely decentralized, completely distributed, is really freaking difficult if there isn't some sort of centralized party in the middle. If there isn't somebody who's controlling all of this and making sure that the standards are being followed and the whole system is kept cohesive. It's not impossible, but it's very freaking hard. So Worldcoin started off, or now World, started off trying to solve this problem specifically after doing tons of research and finding that most of the stuff just wasn't good enough. And they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go with the highest source of entropy to identify people uniquely so that it can't be defeated by generative AI in the future. Um, and we're going to do it in a way where we're going to make sure that people can't even like spoof it because they have to show up in person to a trusted node operator who's going to scan their eyeballs, and with those eyeballs generate basically the way it works is that you have somebody who's orb custodian. They get like jobs to go verify people at certain times and places and days, and the user they sign up, they have like a world app, and then they create like a session ID within the world app. When they are ready to register, they click the button, and then the session ID is used in combination with the orb to create basically a unique identifier with what's called a nullifier that's only known to the user that holds that session ID. So that later, if they lose their device or something like that, that they could recover this later. Uh, so the orb does have all this trusted execution hardware on it. It has been open sourced, but public breakdowns have been very highly controlled. So there's a lot of skepticism in exactly what's inside the orb and what's running and how's it running. And the other thing is that they ship this really fast with very minimal oversight. So I think it's incredible, right? Like they built something in just a couple of years after identifying a need for it. But also, they built something to scan the eyes of every single human on Earth within a couple of years, and very little challenge or
Yeah.
oversight as part of that. So
Yeah.
the ambition, I think, doesn't really match the kind of time in rigor or proving of what they're trying to do. And
Hmm.
it's a Silicon Valley mindset, high scale growth mindset with this hardware that you might or might not trust. Basically, your embeddings, so your embeddings are basically going to be the iris data that's pre-processed and transformed by the orb, are going to be encrypted, and then there's all these different stages of encryption where they create a key based off of this data, and then that other key is used with like like a wallet key within the wallet, kind of like a MetaMask key. I think it's built on Safe now actually, with a safe key that you then use to create an on-chain account. And then the encrypted embeddings, the machine learning representation of your iris, is stored in this other collection of servers. So one thing to note, I think this is the most important thing to note, is your iris data is uniquely identifying and it's public, right? Like my iris data, I'm walking around constantly with my iris data just on display.
Right.
Uh, Not all cameras can detect iris data, but a really good CCTV camera, it's been shown in the literature that you can get a good enough reconstruction with post processing on iris data from up to 20 feet away.
Mm.
So, what does that mean? It means that you have the ability to uniquely identify as many people as Worldcoin has scanned through good enough CCTV and maybe like state level, say type like resources, which makes Worldcoin a target for state level intelligence or state level, say, operations that are intended to say find specific types of people or track certain types of groups of people for whatever reason, right? And so WorldCoin's kind of set itself up as a honeypot potentially
Mm.
if certain assumptions don't hold. So the first thing is that because the machine learning model of the embeddings is made open source and public, you know what kind of transformation you need to go from to get to embeddings, to get to like the machine learning representation of it. So if you have an example of an iris, you can generate kind of like the intermediate representation that's used to create the key. And you would need to do a bunch of other things too as well to like actually break the key. But that's good enough for a state level, say, actor. Um, and then second, you need to trust that however the embeddings are transmitted from the orb to the secure set of servers, it's I think three servers that are running an MPC setup across three universities. That tech was set up, I'm pretty sure by the WorldCoin team, and those universities are just running the hardware for it. So you need to trust both the setup, the software, the
Mm.
communication channels, and that these MPC systems really do hold up, and that none of them can be compromised at any point. And that's assuming that a state level actor is disinterested in this, right? Because I think that it increases the stakes as well.
Right.
So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with one of the biggest honeypots that's being assembled primarily off the backs of people in the global south to bootstrap a token to get to $1 billion market valuation based off of traction metrics that are somewhat, I don't want to say exploitative, but can be interpreted as exploitative and maybe exploitative depending on how time comes to because I don't see any data centers, I don't see any OpenAI models being trained or run within Africa under under jurisdictions and sovereignty within those countries. I really
Right.
see them just becoming new consumers for Western, I don't want to
Hmm.
say it, but techno imperialism.
Right.
That's my concern. That aside, I do really respect the technology and the work that the teams put into it. I'm just very skeptical that this sort of monolithic approach powered by kind of tokenomics is going to safely scale to the entire world without having some major hiccups along the way.
Yeah, and just to like maybe add to that as well, there was the reporting Cointelegraph. I'm just looking at it right now, where several countries have been investigating them or have either banned or taken actions against them, including Spain, Portugal, Germany, Italy, Kenya, India, South Korea, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina. Like it's a fairly long list of countries in many parts of the world. Um, so yeah, it seems to me like there's a few trust assumptions in there that makes it debatable. Just like it's sort of like this. There are certain points of like trust me, bros, and then the fact that they are based in Silicon Valley in the U.S. and most of their data they're getting from the global South. Therefore, all that data is being processed inside the U.S. and anytime in the short term, for sure, the U.S. it that like they're processing data of people from the global South. There's not going to be any regulation put probably on for the next for the foreseeable future, at least within the Trump administration. I would presume. So yeah, there's a lot of real weird stuff going on over there when it comes to identity. I mean, I think it just in one sense also proves kind of like the importance of identity at the same time. Like just because a bunch of, tech people in Silicon Valley are trying to solve the identity problem in that way doesn't mean it's not a problem to be solved or like not a problem to be looked into, but that in fact we need alternatives at the very least, like Holland, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, our major complete philosophical difference here is that instead of taking a monolithic approach where we control the hardware, we control the software, it's open source, but it's only we control who can pull requests, and we're creating kind of like this Apple type ecosystem, right? Like, Apple's built on Unix, it's built on open source in the same way that World is built on the Optimism and Ethereum stack, right? But there's very little control that you have within the ecosystem, and you just trust Apple that they have your best interests in mind. So World is trying to position itself in the same way. And honestly, maybe their biggest competitor is Apple, because Apple could pivot to this at any point. So what we see is a huge opportunity, though, to build truly distributed, decentralized, pluralistic models for identity proving. So that's the approach we take with Passport, where developers have kind of full control over how they want to verify or onboard their users. It's also why we have the biggest and the most adoption within places where sybil defense and proof of personhood is actually mostly needed right now, which is in Web3 for proof of personhood. And so devs basically have the tools that they need. They can choose to verify with on-chain reputation, web of trust. They can choose to verify with, say, biometrics, for example. They can choose to verify with government IDs. And there's an a la carte approach that the devs can take that lets them sculpt kind of the specific type of identity offering that they need for their users. So this kind of more tools-based approach will let us fill in this difficult gap. So we're actually tackling the more difficult problem here, which is uniting different types of identity to be interoperable and interusable while still preserving privacy and user data sovereignty and not locking into a specific ecosystem. Whereas World went for the let's scale as fast as we can because we found this one little niche of these sets of assumptions and technologies that lets us have a venture-sized outcome in the next 10 years by basically converting people's eyes into tokens. All of the world's eyes into tokens is the mission, right?
We're tokenizing the eyes, yeah. Token eyes.
Token eyes. Oh, interesting. There's something there.
Because we're running up a bit on time, I originally wanted to ask you about zero knowledge cryptography, but I think maybe we can probably skip that for now. But just to note that for people that zero knowledge cryptography is kind of like a major component of all of this. It's also a fairly can appear complex kind of topic to understand, but highly recommend people to check out. To read up on it a little bit. I think it's just going to come more and more over time and become increasingly important, not just in crypto systems, but I think in other ones as well. But it is a fundamental part of how, from what I understand, that a lot of Holonym's tech is able to use identity while preserving privacy in many ways.
Yep.
But so I was interested last thing I wanted to touch upon is this kind of little bit awkward question because in the crypto space, there is this influence of kind of cypherpunks and thinking of privacy as this kind of like ultimate good thing that should all something that we aspire to, like everything should be kind of almost in secret in the dark and should not be within the eyes of the government. But my view so far has been that it's kind of like it's a good and a bad thing. Like it's a double-edged sword, of course. I don't think it's useful necessary to think of like blanket privacy as being a pure good in all circumstances. I want public accountability on things. I want transparency on things. But it has always been this kind of like contradiction within the crypto space or like kind of tension. But so I was curious to, just know more a bit about how you guys are approaching this double-edged sword nature. I also know it's like it's like not an easy problem to figure out. I want, we want privacy for weak in a way, and we want accountability for the elite and for the powerful. Yeah, I'm curious how you guys have approached that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll This is one of my, I think, favorite topics to think about, and we surround ourselves with multiple challenges and difficult problems to solve, whether it's personhood or something. But this is a really difficult one that's worth tackling. The first thing I think it's worth mentioning is that the solution is going to end up being um, literally defined by how we decide to organize as humans in civic society. That's what I'll say. This is going to be a human coordination and governance problem when it comes to privacy and accountability. I'll start off by saying that. But let's take a look at kind of, why these different philosophies have emerged. So, if we start off with kind of like the main criticism of blockchain, that it's, there's these secret super shadowy coders out there stealing all the world's money, and that, a maximalist might say everything should be open, everything should be public, everyone should see what transactions you're doing. The government should have the ability to request data on demand to see who you are, what you are, who you've social, et cetera, right? That's not that one side of maximalism, and those people definitely exist in the government and intelligence services, I'm sure. Now, how about the other side, the exact polar opposite? So on one side, you kind of have like this, sense of need for security, that there should always be backdoors and security guarantees, because anything hidden is a threat. And then on the other side, you have this other world where, identities are completely interchangeable. Nobody knows who anyone is or anything is. Nobody knows what transactions you've had, what you've had for breakfast, what your real name is, what you look like, what your preferences are. When you go and buy bread, you're buying bread from a masked person. You don't know who they are. You don't have anything about their identity. They're interchangeable, even like the identities are completely fungible. There is no kind of uniqueness as well. It's max entropy as can be for any functioning society. That's the extreme, extreme, extreme end, where you have a complete fungibility of identity and unique identifiability. Is just not possible. A society like that, while it's fun to imagine in a science fiction setting, I think really doesn't lend itself to kind of, I think, a society I would want to live in, right? I want to know who's baking my bread, or who I'm buying tomatoes from. And so one huge struggle is to kind of avoid these polarizing argumentative points and recognize them as kind of the boundaries, and then start thinking about what's the wiggle room in between. So how do we have privacy with accountability while preserving kind of trust and human interactions that come along with that? We thought a lot about this, so we came up with a schema where basically what we do is we think of privacy as a privilege that's afforded, or you could say a right that's afforded within a social contract, right? So you could think of it as kind of a privilege at large, but when you enter into a social contract, into an agreement with, say, a specific community or country or application or DAO or what have you, you're basically consenting to, consenting to a set of rules of behavior, of governance, of how you're going to conduct yourself. And with that comes, say, privacy. However, if there comes a point where you infringe those rules, say, for example, your account, your pseudonymous account, is the one linked directly to draining the treasury by exploiting a smart contract bug, that would become a condition in which maybe your data would be disclosed or decrypted.
What I want to touch upon that we were talking about a little bit as well, just like an example or a couple of examples of like how this approach is manifesting maybe. One that we talked about before is a covenant that you guys are working on, and then the kind of like actual manifestation with the Aztec bridge that you guys built out recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So striking this balance where you have privacy with accountability, right? So you consent into some rules, and then as long as you behave by those rules, you're considered anonymous. But if you infringe upon those rules, and it's a requirement, your information might be decrypted. So a perfect example of that is the canonical bridge that we've built to Aztec, which is a privacy-first L2 with built-in zero-knowledge proofs for basically private state. Like all of your data is basically generated in a zero-knowledge proof on the client side before you even submit a transaction. So Aztec's amazing. It's the future of privacy. Now, the problem with Aztec is it's a privacy blockchain, which means it's a place where if I'm a North Korean hacker or I'm a bad actor, this is a place where I would go to hide from accountability. This is where I would dump my ill-gotten gains. And to prevent that, the team was really conscious about it, the Aztec team. They reached out to us about a year ago now, actually, and said, hey, we like what you guys have been doing in the identity and zero knowledge space. Would you consider helping us out with this hard problem? So together we designed a solution where to bring money into the Aztec ecosystem, you have to pass through a bridge that has this programmable privacy with accountability built into it. So if you're transferring below a certain threshold amount from Ethereum to Aztec, you just need a proof of personhood proof. So you just need to prove that you're a unique person who's transferring this $1,000 once and that you're not transferring $1,000 with 100,000 different accounts. If you're transferring more than that, you're going to need to do something a little bit more hefty. You're going to have to go through a zero knowledge KYC flow. So where you prove in zero knowledge that you have a legit government credential and that the information that government credential doesn't show up in an international sanctions list. And that sanctions list could be defined as is. So if you pass that first pass, then you're allowed to bridge, but you're also shown a little pop-up, right, that says, hey, I agree to follow the terms and conditions of this. If, it turns out later that I actually was a North Korean hacker, I show up on a blacklist that's maintained by 3 or 4 different, say Oracle services, then those will be conditions enough for my data to be decrypted to some public key. So what's cool about this is just one example of it, but what's cool about this is you can actually put in all sorts of programmability around the decryption conditions. You can have, say, different sources that you're listening to that, say, would report adverse events. And then you can even have decryption occur to, say, a consortium or some form of DAO of legal representatives that represent the space, that represent accountability for the space. So the design space is really huge for this. Now, how do you actually get people to come together and think about this? Like I started off saying like, hey, like in the beginning, it's all about human coordination and governance that's going to decide this. Like in which cases do we implement this and how do we implement it? So that's what we've built this thing called the Covenant as part of kind of the nucleating core of human.tech, which allows people to come together with these considerations in mind. The Covenant is basically a system of different principles or values that are important when building technology. And we've kind of opened up this framework to basically anyone out there who's interested in these sorts of things and being able to contribute different pieces of written works, academic works, essays, and also artistic pieces like poetry or we've had some incredible contributions from artists that are Sotheby's curated, as well as that have worked in the OpenAI Fellowship and all sorts of stuff. So the Covenant really is a way for people to kind of bring these different vantages or viewpoints or pluralistic forms of, say, structuring social contracts with different values and giving them kind of like this basic framework to align over. So we see it as kind of like this really primeval starting point that allows these like really complex human coordination problems to kind of fork off of.
Nice. And hopefully as well, I may have a piece in there if it makes it in. But yeah, it's a really interesting, I think, guiding document essentially on how to approach these things and dealing with the contradictions or having a framework for dealing with the contradictions of the space, like you said. I mean, I liked how you were saying is like almost just take both extreme ends as almost like guardrails in some way, or just like take them both rather than forcing yourself into a position of one or the other. I think is just like clearly the better move than to choose one or the other. But yeah, thanks, Shadi, for coming on. It's been over an hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time. Are there any last plugs where people can, or just websites or apps you would funnel people towards where they can keep up with Holonym, or that they should be checking out right now to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Josh. It's been absolute pleasure and could definitely go on for hours. It's always great getting to talk to you. Yeah, to find out about us, it's super simple. Just go to human.tech and there's lots to explore and drill down there. So.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks so much. And yeah, I'll catch you later.
All right. See you later, sir.